right, and deploying. And then monitoring and the customer feedback. The customer feedback is more in terms of the cloud application. And we'll come to that. So we talked about that in detail. Plan and measure, develop and test, release and deploy, monitor and optimize. It is essentially the point in here is that it is a continuous loop. It's not that you can do this inside. Again, you have to do it together. So for example, how do you accelerate software delivery? By enabling collaboration across the software supply chain. And how do you balance cost, quality, and risk? By eliminating waste and automating manual process. We talked about that. Improve client experience by speeding the customer feedback loop. Let me move quickly. So this is the tool chain, right? So when you say DevOps, it's not just about release or deploy. It's not just about one function. It's not just about operations. It's not just about deploy, right? This is the whole tool chain. You have development, right? Who will check in the code, goes to SCM system, right? And the build management system picks up the code from SCM, builds it, right? And then you have the system integration testing as a gate, right? And then from there it goes to user acceptance testing, right? And from there it goes to the production testing gate, and finally it comes out. Right? That is the tool chain. Right? And what we want to do is write down the cost, speed time to market, and reduce risk. So somebody mentioned that they want to know what is how mature the Indian market is in terms of DevOps usage, or how mature the worldwide market is in terms of DevOps usage. Right? So these are so this is the maturity model, the DevOps maturity model, right? So the higher you can go, the more mature you are. So the practice, make it repeatable, make it reliable, and then scale. And the red outline is for those areas that's the industry norm. It's not about whether it's worldwide or India. It's not geo-specific. This is more in terms of what is the industry norm. So as you can see, there's a lot of room for improvement in the requirements of the plan and measure. Right? We are just starting out there. Right? Whereas with development and test, we have made some progress. Right? There is some automation there, so there's some progress made in development and test. But when it comes to release and deploy, again, we had moved up, but then what happened due to the technology shifts, right? We are again at the lower side because there's a lot of room for improvement. And then with respect to monitor and optimize, again we are looking up there, but at the same time, if you look at the very top, right? There's a lot of room for improvement. We need to get to a point where, for example, when you talk about these cloud applications, when you talk about these applications that are born on cloud, born on web, right? There are certain patterns. Right? For example, nobody can predict the peak usage. It varies, right? I mean, it depends on other factors which you have no control over, right? So how can your environment scale for the peak in demand? Which means you need an environment which can realize it, right? And fine-tune it. For example, it can on the fly add more CPUs. It can on the fly add more memory, right? More storage as needed. Right? So we need that kind of systems. Right? So that's the maturity model. So now let me talk about our story. So I've been in rational division since 1995 in IBM. Right? So it's about, one of the things I have done a lot is write code. So we are going to tell you, I'm going to tell you our story, the way we progressed in the last few years on continuous delivery. So we started out, so one of the main points of this chart is that we have teams spread across, the development teams spread across all over the world. And the goal we had is from a 12-month cycle, reduce the release cycle to a 12-week cycle. That's great. I mean, you work overtime and do whatever you do in 1 year and do it in 3 months. Right? Is that possible? Yes, it is possible. You can do that. But it won't work for long. Right? And the reason we did that is, as you know, the market has been shifting. Right? And there is a need for getting the capabilities in the user's hand quickly. Right? Just the way it happens in open source. Right? So, for example, you see Jazz Hub over there, right? A screenshot. Right? That is our hosted service, a hosted development environment. Right? So, and as you know, with any hosted development environment, you want to refresh it on the fly. There is no upgrade involved. Right? It should be pretty seamless. So unless we get to this model of continuous delivery, it will be hard for us to sustain it. So that's what we did. And how are we improving? So this is an example from the development team, the team that developed the application lifecycle management tools within Marshall. So what is it? So I'm not sure you back up, I mean, those of you back up there can read the title, but the title of the table. 2008, 2010, 2012, 2013, and yeah, these are the milestones we picked. What is so special about it? 2008 is the time when IBM came out with one of the first JAS-based tool called Ration Team Consult. Ration Team Consult and JAS is an initiative from Eclipse team. Right? Because we want to bring to the world the best practices that we follow in Eclipse in terms of tooling. So we used 2008 as the milestone, as one of the benchmark. Right? What happened in 2010? In 2010, we started looking at application lifecycle management ecosystem as a set of capabilities instead of individual tools. So, for example, instead of a requirement tool or instead of a test management tool, we came up with the collaborative lifecycle management solution, which is all about capabilities. Right? It doesn't matter whether you have the test management capability from IBM Rational or from HP, for example, HP Quality Center. Right? You could integrate. Right? So that's what 2010 is about. And 2012, 2013, that's the last 2 years. So what happened there? So 2012 June, we made an announcement that from that point onwards, we are going to do quarterly releases. From 12 months, we are going to reduce it to 12 weeks. Did we succeed? Yes, we did. Right? Just that in 2012, after June, the next release was in December because we had to do some course correction with ourselves to get there. Right? We made the 4.0 release in June 2012, then 4.01 in December 2012, then 4.02 in March, 4.03 in June, 4.05, 4.04 in September, and 4.05 in December last week. Right? And you can see the improvement. Total deployment time from 2 days, right? It has come down to 2 hours. And the total, for example, overall time to development, right? From 120 days, we have come down to 3 days. So what is happening is, we are quickly deploying what we develop. And we are self-hosting on those. So this is the DevOps tool chain. So on the requirements and the plan and measure side, you have to, for example, the focal point, or you have the requirements composer. Right? Again, as I mentioned, it's about the requirements capability. Right? It's just that requirement composer is a provider of the requirement capability. And on the development side, you have Ration Team Consult, which is a tool with 5 capabilities built into it. Right? You have source control management, you have version control, you have the defect tracking task management, right? The second one, you have the build management built in there. You have the dashboards and reporting, right? And you have the agile planning and the regular waterfall or the traditional project management planning as well, built into all 5 capabilities built into one tool. And in case you don't want to use any of these capabilities built in, you have the choice to use the existing capability that you have. For example, you can use Staircase if you want, right? Or if you want to use SVN for version control, you can do that, right? Or Git, for example, right? It's all about, that's what I mentioned about, it's about capabilities. It's not about a tool. And then on the testing side, you have the quality manager and the test workbench. Right? Quality manager, as I mentioned, is just a provider for the quality management capability. Right? I mean, if you are a quality center user, you can have the quality center as a provider for this management capability. Right? And then you have the test workbench, which provides you the automation capabilities and the performance, etc. Then the virtualization server, which lets you get up and running. So here is the other important thing, right? How do you put the test infrastructure in place before development is complete? Right? Let's think about the pharmaceutical domain, for example. Right? As you know, there are these regulations, HIPAA regulations, etc., that we need to adhere to. Right? So there are messages which has to be generated in a particular format, for example. Right? How do you do that before development is complete? That is where the test virtualization comes to your help. Right? You can have a layer in there which masquerade as the actual server, but it is your test virtualization. So you can have the test framework ready by the time development is complete. So, and then on the provisioning side, we have T-Leaf, which can instrument applications and give you intelligent analytics when the applications are run. And then there is a smart cloud orchestrator, right? Which, and again, it's on, I don't know if you realize that it's based on Chef, and there is another symbol that's Square, right? It's OpenStack. How many of you heard about OpenStack? OpenStack is an infrastructure as service. It's an open source effort, and IBM is a founding member. IBM joined OpenStack as a founding member of the OpenStack Foundation. So, as I mentioned, this is about, on the provisioning side, it's about how can it intelligently upgrade your systems, right? Fine-tune your system as and when needed in terms of peak usage. And the most important one, release and deploy, right? So, IBM early this year acquired a company called Urbanco, and we have a couple of capabilities from there, which is the you deploy and you release, right? So what is so special about it? Right? It's not your traditional application anymore, right? These applications either go in as a web application, which means you need to install your application into a web application web server, right? It could be WebSphere, right? Or it could be as lightweight as Tomcat, right? Or it could be any other web application servers out there. Right? So how do you come up with a deployment model which will satisfy all these in a repeatable way? Right? You don't have to go and you shouldn't have to go and configuration because it's not about users installing and using this. Remember, it's about your ability to deploy it in-house and use it effectively for your testing. It's extremely important from that way. So you deploy helps you in terms of capturing these as diagrams and essentially as nodes that you can configure and say that this is satisfied by this physical being, for example. Right? So you can do all that. So which means you focus on the deployment model. The actual work is done by you deploy. Similarly, you release helps you with the release planning. How do you put all these things together? Right? When you have, especially when you talk about the software application. So this is the mobile version. I mentioned we'll come back to that, right? So what is so different about the mobile application development and Devops in the context of mobile is there are a couple of important points in here. One is with respect to developing your application for multiple platforms. Right? So, for example, you may want to target, maybe initially you may want to target one OS, or you may want to target one vendor, for example. Right? But ultimately you have to scale. Right? So, how do you develop applications that can be installed on multiple platforms? That's number one. Number two is, how do you test your applications on different platforms? Even if you target only iOS, you have to make sure that you test it on different form factors, right? You have the iPhone form factor, you have the iPad mini form factor, and you also have the iPad form factor. You need to, so you know that, for example, LinkedIn application, right? Is a different application already, right? On iPad versus on your small mobile, right? So when you do this kind of specialization, what are the steps you take to ensure that these are it's taken care of at every stage? So that is the challenging part in mobile development. And it also has one more aspect which is kind of interesting, because as I mentioned, right, these mobile applications are essentially the systems of engagement on top of your systems of the car. So which means you have to have some way of either exposing it directly or putting so what is so special about these systems of engagement? Peak usage. You have no control over peak usage. So many times you have a cloud infrastructure in between, which the mobile application will access, which will in turn access the backend server. So this can take the load, because your backend server is already there and it's designed for certain purpose and certain load. Right? Your ability to influence that is limited. That is where this infrastructure helps you in terms of deploying it into not only to the cloud but also to the various mobile devices, for example, for running events. And of course, mobile automated testing for mobile as well, which is now bundled as part of Worklight. Worklight is again another company IBM acquired in the space of mobile application development, right? And we have the testing capability and development capability all integrated into one Eclipse shell, along with the Russian team console, which is for team collaboration. So this is the cloud part, which is the challenges are similar, I would say, but it's more in terms of the code test, right? And also in terms of monitoring and provisioning. I mentioned that, right? It's about fine tuning and depending on the cloud. So these are applications which are born on the cloud. Right? So the way you program your traditional application, the way you write code for traditional application is different from the way you write code for cloud application. That is what I meant by the traditional programmers, right? As traditional programmers, we have a challenge. We have to change. So this is emerging adoption patterns, right? You have infrastructure as service, you have platform as service, you have software as service, and then you have these cloud providers, which gives you the entire business model is on cloud, right? So infrastructure as service is your infrastructure like OpenStack, for example. Platform as service, again, another open player is there, right? Which is a Cloud Foundry. And then there is software as service. This is where the API economy comes into play. For example, you have an opportunity to come up with a new business model by wherein you will expose your API and other people will leverage it, right? In fact, the revenue that Twitter made from its APIs is actually substantial, right? So it's about creating another market opportunity by exposing your API. It's not about doing it by yourself, right? So this is another important aspect that is coming into play right now. Okay, to summarize, so we have, if you combine Agile and Devops, right, you can increase your quality by 50% and downtime by 70%. And this is from one of our clients who adopted Devops in the past 1 year. So this is the main part I had, and before I have one more slide before I sign off, but I can take any questions if you have. Nitish, do you have time?
Yeah, we have time for questions. Do you have any questions? So, can you repeat this?
Sure.
Okay. So what are different frameworks that this particular deployment tool is supporting right now? Is it like capable to deploy each and every framework like say Ruby on Rails, Cake, Django, and Spring? So that is a major question about it.
Okay. So what you do is you write a small extension or a plugin if what you are looking for is not available. For example, when IBM bought Urban Code, right, some of the deployment patterns for WebC were not available. Right? So that's one of the things we developed as plugins out of the box right now. Right? So Urban Code has been pretty successful amongst a lot of organizations. And the way they use it is they liberate the engine and they extend it in the way the organizations want. As you know, the deployment patterns differ, as you just mentioned, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Ruby on Rails and other different patterns you mentioned, right? So it is definitely possible. Right? I don't know off the top of my head what are available out of the box, but there is a community around it, there is an ecosystem around it.
Now, one more question, right? So you didn't talk about how you will scale this particular infrastructure. Can we scale it on demand, or this is that particular Urban Code has that particular leverage or have that advantage when you say, okay, I want to my infrastructure to be a scalable infrastructure. When I need it, it should be scaled. So is there any capability of doing that as well?
Yes, so what you're getting at is essentially infrastructure as code.
Yeah.
Right? So Urban Code has the ability to write in a particular language. You can write code in a particular language for provision, you're signing up for installing the prereq software, starting the service, etc. Right? And it can also interface with other, as I mentioned, right, Chef and Smart Cloud Orchestrator. Right? So the fine tuning comes from there. Right? So you should you can look at IBM.com and then just search for next generation platforms. You will hit some interesting links there.
Thank you. Thank you.
What's the tool you were doing? Smart Cloud.
There's another company that we bought about 4 or 5 months back, SoftLayer. How many of you heard about SoftLayer? Right. So SoftLayer provides exactly what you need.
That's fine.
Right. So I mentioned about Jazz Hub, right? Our hosted service that is now actually layered on top of SoftLayer.
Right. As the DevOps word is spreading more and more, the AppOps engineers started calling themselves as DevOps. You have given a case study of your organization. So my question is are the developers ready to accept this change in your organization? How's that change coming along? In my organization, operations engineers are ready to accept the DevOps profile or that change. But when I go to developer, he's not very comfortable calling himself or herself as DevOps. So what is your perception of that?
Okay. Right. So that's what your point is. So again, one of the things we need to make sure that we make sure from the beginning is anything that has to be mandated has to be automated. Right. So once you put that in place and you tell developers that these are the processes, for example. Again, in our case, processes are not just sitting on a wiki page. We enact it using the tool as well, right? Continuously. And what the operations team is actually doing is they are writing code now. They are writing the code for Chef. They are for standing up the VM. They are writing code for deploying it, right? So essentially, infrastructure as code, right? and giving you that ability, giving you that extra bandwidth that you would have, otherwise you wouldn't have, right? For that purpose. So there is a cultural change, right? I can show you a few more links down the line where you can just read up and the cultural change that we went through. Right? So there are a series of articles that we have written with the tag culture, right? And it's all public. You can take it. You're absolutely right. For anything that needs to happen, there has to be a cultural shift, right? There has to be a mutual trust. But the moment we think about us as two different teams, that's not going to happen. We have to change the way we work.
So you talk, do you manage to do that with rapid development to make sure that firstly automation can be done in sync with development, and then also to make it efficient enough that you don't spend too much time with the maintenance of your automated tests? What are the top tips you have there?
2012, we signed up to do continuous delivery, and we said we will do it in quarterly basis, right? And I also mentioned to you that in 2012, after June, the next release that we made was in December, right? One of the reasons was exactly this. We want to get to a point where we have confidence in our automated tests, right? So what we did is, our development team dedicated all their energy on automation. Putting the frameworks in place. Putting the frameworks in place where everybody can incrementally build upon, right? And it has complexities. For example, on a non-UI side, it's pretty trivial. But the moment you come to UI, again with respect to, for example, most of our application is based on web, right? It's web technology, but there are integrations into Eclipse and there are integrations into Visual Studio from a development perspective. So those sides are fine as well. But it's mostly with respect to how do you write the test for web UI automation, right? So we are not entirely where we want to be, right? And that is why it does take some kind of heroics right now to get to do it in 3 months, right? But we are on an upward trend to get there, right? For example, I talked about it called a rational test workbench, right? It not only has our own solutions built in for test automation, we are also incorporating Selenium, right? From open source. So it's not about using just focusing on certain tools to do this. It's about taking the best of the breed and achieving the goal. Right? So we are there, and again we have written certain articles about it. Right? I can just point you a few links how we went about that. Thank you. Sure.
Challenges faced in getting
there? There are a lot. I'll repeat that, but I'll tell you. The main challenges were in terms of the topology that we support, right? For example, the entire application that we have, right? The way we did that is, and as you know, this originated from Eclipse, which is an open source tool, right? We've been thinking in the open. It's about the databases. It's about what do you have? It's about collaborating servers. Here, the entire application is essentially a set of collaborating servers. So what is the topology that we use? And what is the topology that we can verify? Right? For example, we support DB2 as a backend database, we support Oracle as a backend database, we support the SQL Server as a backend database. Right? So getting all these combinations right was one of the challenges of this. And it actually, for us, it was a need as well, because I'm projecting Jazz.net for you. Right? I don't know how many of you heard about or know about Jazz.net. Jazz.net is one of the first initiatives where we develop all the tools totally in the open for you. You can look at our plans, you can look at our work items that we work on, you can look at our design documents. Everything is open. Even if you want to download rational tape control source code, it's available there for you to download. It's not open source. It's what we call as open commercial development. Right? And we have captured all that. So on Jazz.net, towards the right, you will see a link called library, right? And then there's a link called blogs. You will see all these blogs there, whatever I mentioned. The challenges we faced in deployment, where we are now and where we want to be. We are going to put a roadmap in one of the blogs there.
Yeah. Months. But what I see is the development cycle from 120 days to 3 days. So is that just the 3 days of code takes 3 months to deploy, or you have multiple chunk of 3 days of code going in?
No, see, for example, 12-week cycle, right? Within that, 8-week development, right? And then 1 week stabilization. So that's what we have done. And what we do is, every build, we want to get to a goal where every build is deployable and